Bonnie lives in a very large city, far away from where she grew up. She lives in a residential group home with several other young men and women, and she works at a nearby workshop. Bonnie is not particularly happy with either situation, but that's where she is right now. Bonnie is a fairly large woman, enough that she sways from side to side when she walks. She's probably in her early 30s. She has flecks of gray hair that have begun to give away her age. And Bonnie has 3 great loves: flowers in her hair, frilly white blouses, and a single-minded love affair with Jesus. Professionals would say that Bonnie is trainable, mentally impaired. Bonnie would say, "Isn't everyone a little impaired?" Bonnie believes in God's loving forgiveness because she has experienced it deep within her being. And she lives her life in a kind of wild abandonment for Christ's love. Bonnie tells her story, and I quote, "You know how it is when you fall down and you hurt yourself? And sometimes your skin gets cut, and even after it heals, you can still see the scar? Well, once when I was young, my parents told me to go upstairs and get dressed because they were going to take me out for supper to a fancy restaurant. So I went upstairs and I put on my best clothes and we got into the car, and pretty soon we drove up to the state mental institution. I knew this wasn't a fancy restaurant. And then they told me if I didn't act better, they were going to bring me here and leave me." That made a big scar. But the scar is on the inside, and no one knows it's there. Sometimes we make other people have scars on the inside, the kind that don't heal very well, and the mark is always there. Last summer, Bonnie worked in a bathhouse at a local beach, giving out towels to the ladies as they dressed after a day at swimming. She was very proud of her job, and she learned a lot about people. Some were friendly, some were arrogant, and some were just plain rude. But she stuck with it, even when they called her retarded or stupid or dumb, and when they made fun of the big plastic flowers in her hair. And she proved that she was stronger than any of their name-calling, that work was an honor to her, and that it was important to say thank you. Her first paycheck was a big day for Bonnie. Now, most people spend their first paycheck to pay bills or buy something that they wanted for a while, but not Bonnie. She went to the florist, where she picked out a dozen red roses and white carnations, and she asked the florist to arrange them in 2 bunches. And then she took the bus to the church, where she put them on each side of the altar. And with them, she put this note: "Dear Jesus, thank you for getting me this job. Love, your friend, Bonnie." $36 she paid for those flowers, her whole paycheck. Red roses because of Jesus' sacrifice. White roses because of Jesus' love. Our text for today is a story that is commonly called the widow's mite. It's from Luke 21, verses 1 to 4. It's actually a story that most of you know, but it is commonly misunderstood as simply being about money. It is not. It's printed in your bulletin if you'd like to follow along. He looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. He said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on." As I said, the familiar story of the widow's mite has been misunderstood as often as it has been told. The simple misunderstanding is that this story is about giving money to the church. The poor widow gave all the money she had. It's true. But the author of the Gospel of Luke follows this story immediately with 2 questions from the disciples. Then, as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and decorations, Jesus said, and this is in verses 5 and 6, and I quote, "As for these things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." Jesus went on to talk about the end days, and then he ends the whole section with these words, "Watch therefore and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man." That's much later in the same chapter, verse 36. So first, he's telling them that things are not important, including money. Not one stone bought with church offerings, by the way, will be left on top of another. Secondly, he's telling them to be more like the widow. But here's the puzzle. Why should they be more like the widow if their offerings for the church will only buy the things which will ultimately be destroyed? You see what I mean? If they're like the widow and they give their money to the church, which buys things to build up the church, and then the church is destroyed, what's the point? The puzzle can only be solved by realizing that Jesus is telling them to fashion their hearts after the widow's heart. You see, the blessing that Jesus spoke on the widow was not only about her gift of money. It was that, make no mistake, but it was also about the attitude that she exhibited in her giving. Jesus said of her in verse 4, "But she out of her poverty has put all the livelihood that she had." This blessing is not on her poverty or her financial gift alone. It is about offering her whole life, her whole spirit, her whole attitude. It's living in the way that she lived. It's the same attitude that Bonnie had, spending her entire check on flowers in Thanksgiving. Bonnie is like the widow. You know, you can almost picture the 2 of them making their way down the aisle unnoticed to the collection area, gently and with devotion, placing on the table what they had to give, and then leaving as quietly as they came. Recently, someone in our church had a health crisis on a Tuesday and was not sure they would make it. And by Thursday had written love letters to their children before a surgery. But also from Tuesday to Thursday, that person recognized that they had made a commitment to the church that if they passed, they would not be able to keep. It was not a financial commitment so much as it was a commitment of time and energy. And so that person spent what could have been the last hours of life carefully writing detailed instructions and making phone calls to ensure that that commitment would be carried out. I was amazed, humbled, and extraordinarily grateful that that person was so committed and passionate about the commitment made that they would spend precious hours and hours taking care of something that truly, in the big scope of things, could have been left undone. But it was a beautiful commitment that had been made and was important. On our best days, we can take a page from these people and realize that giving is about something quite precious. It's about money or time or energy, but it's about something more significant. It's about the content of our hearts. You know, talk about stewardship sometimes focuses on so many other things. I noticed that recently at a budget meeting we had. What is needed to pay the bills? How the budget's put together? Whether we can afford to pay this or give raises? How much we can give to outreach or mission? What percentage of increase certain line items were received? You know, in 35 plus years of ministry, I have seldom, if ever, heard a discussion at a congregational meeting about the real spirituality of giving. So let me just tell you about a dream I had. In my dream, I went to a congregational meeting at a church somewhere where a person stood up at a budget meeting and offered, get this, it was a dream, to give sacrificially and without hesitation to make a new ministry happen. Now, in this dream, I was knocked over by a feather because someone else stood up at that same meeting and said something like, I see that we are $25,000 short of meeting this budget. So today, I'm going to increase my pledge by $500 a year. Would anyone else like to match my gift? And to my shock and surprise, other people stood up and said, sure. And you know what? In one meeting, in 10 minutes, the whole deficit was made up. It was a dream. And then at the same meeting, a bunch of people who were sitting at the table, they started talking about a need in the church, like some doors were showing some age and some windows needed to be replaced. And they agreed to split the cost between them. And we took that money out of the budget. So it was amazing. And then people came to the church with this kind of can-do spirit, like Bonnie and the widow, and they piped up with, I noticed there was a tree outside on the property that has died, and I'd like to just take care of that myself. You know, I have to kind of celebrate that someone at UCC recently did that. So hooray for that wonderful volunteer. That wasn't a dream. It actually happened. And then I began to wonder, after I woke up, what would happen if a few people who were dedicated to church growth got excited and all volunteered to work together on a committee here and just approached me about being on a 2020 committee? Well, that's still a dream. Anyway, Bonnie and the widow and the members of UCC, together with the Spirit of God, have the ability to bring those miracles into reality. A mite, M-I-T-E, or a might, M-I-G-H-T, can bring dreams and miracles into reality. All it takes are some willing spirits and generous givers. Kahlil Gibran said, "You often say, I would give, but only to the deserving. The trees in your orchard say not so, nor the flocks in your pasture. They give that they may live, for to withhold is to perish." I give thanks to God for the faithful Bonnies, for the willing widows, for the loving stewards, and for the generous people of UCC, and for all the miracles that you make happen every day. Amen. As you're able, please stand and we'll sing 2 times through our benediction song.